Well, it's good to have all of you here with us this morning, and I'm glad to have Jack and Carol back with us. They've been enjoying a month-long vacation down in South Texas, and so it's really good to have them back in the audience. And back at the back, Scott Holman is here, and Phil Cleaver is here. And it, as you know, makes me nervous when people come who have known me since high school. So that's why I asked them to sit at the back. And it is Greg Cox's birthday, and I'm going to tell you a little more about Greg Cox, and that is that we're having a citywide election. What is it, April the 4th? And I know I'm probably not supposed to talk about politics, but I'm going to anyway. I've said for a long time that everything rises and falls based upon leadership, and we need good people in elected offices. And so Greg is running for a city council position. Actually, Phil's running for the mayor slot, and he filled that before, and he was really, really good at it. And so I want to encourage you to get out and vote and tell other people to vote. We did that with Cammie not very long ago, and I made a fatal statement. I said that I didn't like politicians, and yet we had one. And now I don't like politicians. Now I got three. I mean, so it's... Okay, enough of all that. We are returning again to the 4th chapter of the Gospel of John. And we're looking at the material right at the end. Have you noticed that the material in John is kind of difficult? I mean, Matthew and Mark and Luke are gospel accounts, and they're relatively easy. In fact, some time back, we went through Mark's gospel. It was kind of easy, and we went through Luke's gospel. And you may remember it took us over a year, and we moved from Luke to Acts to Romans. And yet here I am, and why I ever decided to go to John, I do not know. I cannot figure it out. But the lessons, the material, are just deeper and harder for me. And such is the case with the material this morning. But I listened to a podcast. I was talking with a young woman in another state. She had asked if she could visit with me several weeks ago, maybe 6 weeks ago. And she said, I'm going to send you some podcasts, 3 podcasts. And it was an interview that a lady was doing with this man, and this man had a very, very difficult job. It was a dangerous job, and it was a job where he said, I frequently find myself in situations where I do not know what to say. I don't know what to do. And he said, I always pray, and from that I learned these 2 things. Burke will put them on the screen. He said, I pray, what do I need to know? And the next one is, what do I need to say? And it's one of those things I listen to that I pulled something out of that will stick with me for a long, long time. For in this work that I'm doing over in Edmond or Oklahoma City, I frequently find myself in situations where I do not know how to handle it. I don't know what to do. I don't know the answer. And so if I know ahead of time, I will pray, show me what I need to know and tell me what I need to say. And if I'm in a situation that's kind of spontaneous, it happens on the moment, I quietly say, what do I need to know right now? And what do I need to say? It's not bad advice, is it? It's not bad thought, is it? Don't we all have that trouble? If you're rearing teenagers or if you have children that are older, aren't there constant dilemmas? And I find myself wondering, how I step into their lives with a little bit of advice, and here I go. What do I need to know, and what do I need to say? And it's in business, and it's in so many areas of our lives. I highly recommend praying those 2 phrases over and over again. And that's what I did at the end of John chapter 4. Because last week I looked at it and I thought, what in the world am I supposed to do with all this material? Because it's a lot of verses. What am I supposed to do with this? And I would read it and I would ask, what do I need to know? What do I need to say? And I would read it again and do the same thing. And finally, something came forth that I hope fits, I hope is right. So in the story, Jesus has concluded the conversation with this Samaritan woman. And she is leaving as the disciples are returning. Now, you remember the disciples are returning. They've been into Sychar to get food. Jesus is hungry, he's thirsty, he's weary, and yet he's had this conversation there at Jacob's well with the Samaritan woman. And as they're coming back with the food, she's beginning to leave, but they can see that Jesus has been talking to her, and they're wondering, what is he doing talking to a Samaritan woman? Remember, that's something you're not supposed to do. But they don't want to say anything. They don't want to ask any questions. And so finally they look at Jesus and they say, Rabbi, you want to eat something? And now Jesus makes this interesting statement back to them. He said, I have food to eat that you know nothing about. And they begin this wondering, well, did someone bring some food? Or did he stash some food away somewhere? What's he talking about? And Jesus responds to them and says, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish my work. Now pause for a moment. Have you ever worked for a long time and you haven't eaten enough and you're really hungry? And I guess it affects us all differently perhaps, but sometimes you get weak. Sometimes you may get a headache. Sometimes you get irritable. So he thinks I'm hungry all the time. That's a joke, folks, okay? I'm really fun-loving. That's a joke, too. But you know how that feels. But then you eat something, and all of a sudden you're refreshed, and you're back ready to go. And Jesus is revealing something. More important to me than that bread that you're bringing from Sychar is the fact that what drives me and what my passion is in life and what keeps me going is to do what God sent me here to do and to finish that kind of work. And now he turns to them and he says, you need to understand this priority, and you need to understand this, because I don't want you saying things like, there are 4 months and then comes the harvest. I want you to look out and see the fields are white already unto harvest. And I can almost imagine Jesus looking toward the city of Sychar and saying, the harvest is here. It's time. But then I have this question. What is he talking about? What is the harvest? What is the harvest? And from the context of this passage, I think the harvest is this. He wants people to believe. He wants people to believe. Because believing is the starting point to everything. If you really believe, you will follow that with a change of life and with many other things, maybe entry into the kingdom. But it starts with belief. A few years ago, not too many years ago, I decided that we needed a well on a certain place for cattle water. So I contacted a well driller. He came out. It was a young man. He had taken over the business from his father. He said, where do you want the well? I knew the water wasn't very deep. I knew there was plenty of water. He said, where do you want the well? I said, well, I don't know. It's somewhere over in this area right here. So he gets into his well drilling truck and he pulls out some kind of copper wire thing. It's twisted together on the end and it's got these two little handles, and he grabs it like this and he starts walking around. And all of a sudden it just kind of dips down. He said, right there is a good place for a well. I said, oh, I'm not sure about that. He said, you try it. You try it. So I took all these copper wires. I walk this way, I walk that way. All of a sudden, I come kind of close to the same spot. It goes down. And I realize I've got the gift. I mean, I can make a living at this finding water deal. And we put the well right there. And we found water so shallow and so much that he had a hard time getting it cased and getting it ready. But then, not too long ago, just a little over a year ago, Mitch had bought this place that joins a place Susan and I have. This place Susan and I have has an irrigation well, 2 wells on it. We don't use them, but it has 2 wells on it. Mitch says, I wonder if the place I just bought over here beside you has irrigation water. So he brought out a irrigation man, and he brought an older gentleman. He had the same kind of wire type thing, only his had a little bulb on the end with some kind of chemical in it, and he walks around. And it dips down here, and he said, now there's some water right here. Well, that happens to be where an old windmill was. I knew there was some water there. But he said, I don't think it's irrigation enough. They're not for irrigation. So Mitch told me later he called him and he said, I have found it. I have found the vein. It's down on the south side of the property, near the fence line. You put an irrigation well there, and it'll really work. But an irrigation well costs a lot more money than my little tiny well. It costs a lot of money. You have to really believe this guy. You have to really believe in the process before you start sinking a well in that spot. See, belief comes before everything else. Everybody getting a picture of that? So this very week, a man walks into our office complex. He's limping because he has a bad case of gout. He's had gout for several days. He's calling it what I used to call it, stress-induced gout. He's talking to one of the ladies there, and she's talking to him about gout because her husband has gout. And so I listen to the cherry juice talk, and I listen to all the other remedies that they're talking about. And you can guess where I'm going with this. So I walk out and I say, I started having gout when I was 37 years old. And it was stress-induced gout. I don't have it anymore. I drink this drink. I started drinking this drink in 2010. Every morning, Susan and I drink this drink. And after drinking that drink for about 18 months, never had another attack of gout. I could tell by the way he was watching me. He didn't believe a word of that. He didn't ask me one question about my drink. He didn't want to know what was in my drink. He just wanted me to be quiet. He will never try my drink. He doesn't what? He doesn't believe. Had he believed, he would say, write it down. Write it down. I'll take whatever. Had he believed. One more. Did you watch the Super Bowl last Sunday night? It is the only Super Bowl, I think, in my entire life that I've watched in its entirety, except for the halftime show. I paused it during the halftime show. I even watched the commercials on purpose because I had been told about 2 commercials that would be there somewhere. Because a group of Christian businessmen across America have been doing something subtly that we haven't been noticing. And one of those businessmen lives in Oklahoma, owns Hobby Lobby. And so if you've been watching NFL games, which I don't, there've been this banner up, there've been these signs up, Jesus, he gets us. Well, there were 2 major advertisements about Jesus with the ending saying, Jesus, he gets us. Because David Green and some of these other Christian businessmen said, I'm tired of giving money to things that don't seem to be moving the needle any at all. We're going to try to make faith-based movies. We're going to try to do other things because we need people in America to start believing again. And I read the reviews on the ads. Do you know that those 2 about Jesus were top rated? The only one that came close or maybe exceeded was the one about this dog that keeps getting older and older until he finally is gone. Sounds kind of bad, but the point is, it does start with belief. And what Jesus wanted this world to know, it's part of the reason he did miracles. What he wanted this world to know is he's really the one. He needs people to believe before they'll ever do anything with their lives. And so watch what happens. The woman goes back into Sychar. And she said, this man out there told me everything about me. He didn't know me, but he knew I'd been married 5 times. He knew the man I'm living with now is not my husband. They all knew that too. But how did he know? And some of the people listen to her and believe based on her testimony. And then they go out to where Jesus is. They go to Jacob's well. And they ask Jesus to come and talk to them in the city. And it says he goes back into the city of Sychar. If you can imagine, this Jewish man going into the city of Sychar stays 2 full days. And you know what happened? Many more people believed. And they began to proclaim, he's the one. You see, their ancestors were also Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses. And they were expecting a Messiah. And we know that he is now the Savior of the world. Now, I don't know what happened in Sychar after that. Nobody does in this day and time. I don't know if they changed their lives. I don't know what happened. I just know that it starts with belief, and Jesus wanted them to believe. And he wants you to believe strongly enough you change your life. Strongly enough you enter his kingdom and live as a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. And the story doesn't end. Now Jesus goes to where he's intended to go all along. He goes to Galilee. And he's in Cana of Galilee. That's where John says he did his very first miracle. Do you remember his very first miracle? He turned that water into wine. And that story has likely gone everywhere. Can you imagine if something like that happened here? Would the story go through the local coffee shops here in Cordell? And then would everybody know it? The story would go everywhere. And while he's there in Cana of Galilee, there's a royal official who is nearby at Capernaum. His daughter is really sick. And if something doesn't change, she's going to die. You know, things haven't changed, have they? Since the beginning of time, a lot of things haven't changed. Some have, but people still get really sick. People still die from illness. And this father doesn't know what to do. What do I need to know? What do I need to say? He's heard about Jesus, obviously. So this royal official goes over and finds Jesus. And he says, if my daughter's sick, my daughter's going to die. I need help. And Jesus says, she'll be okay. Go back home. She'll be okay. Now, he had to believe. And I don't know what kind of level of mature faith he had, but had I been that father, you know what I would have probably done? I would have probably said, I'll feel better if you go with me. I would have probably done some things to try to... But this royal official just turns around and goes back home. Based on the word, she'll get better. And when he's getting close to home, some of his servants come out. A servant comes out. And you can imagine how happy they are. They say, your daughter is better. Your daughter's going to get well. And he's curious. He says, what time did she start getting better? Well, it was yesterday about 1 p.m. And he thought, that is the exact same time that Jesus said she's going to get better. And you know what happened? He and his whole household, what? Believed. Believed. It starts with belief. I'm telling you, if you don't believe, you won't do anything. But if you believe, you will follow through, and you will obey, and you will do, and you will go, and you'll drink my drink, and you'll do whatever if you really believe. And you'll drill the well if you really believe in those copper wires. If you really believe. So the question always is, or sometimes is, do we really believe? Now again, I get I always get myself in a little trouble, don't I? Because sometimes we get into a habit of just going to church. And we go to church all our lives. And we hear the same things over and over again. But sometimes I wonder if I get lost in coming and going, and do I really, really believe? You know what? I do believe in those two things I said at the beginning. Please show me what I need to know and tell me what I need to say. Because I've already been in too many situations where I didn't know and I didn't know what to say. And something comes out that seems to work. I already believe. And so at this moment in time, I'll never quit using those statements. I'll never quit using those in my prayers because I believe. Do we really believe? Do we believe that he was the creator of the world? Do we believe he was God? Do we believe he was the light of this world? Do we believe in being the light of the world, he's the savior of this world? Do we believe that he became, of his own accord, willing to do it, the sacrificed Lamb of God? Do we believe this story that he died on a cross for us? Do we believe he invites us to a full, wonderful, abundant life? All of us. Nobody, it doesn't make any difference about your background. None of that makes any difference. It doesn't make any difference your ethnic background, your social background. Nothing makes any difference. He just said, my lands, he just talked to a Samaritan woman who was living the most reprobate life in the entire world. You can't imagine. For all people to believe and to follow into his kingdom.